Welcome to Keep It Fresh, a webinar where we can help you fight off menu inflation with produce. Hi, I'm Barbara Castiglia of Modern Restaurant Management. Did you know that right now we're in the worst menu inflation timeframe of all time practically, where our inflationary environment is the worst in nearly 50 years. That's back in the 1970s. I remember that. I don't know if anybody else does, but I remember gas lines and all of this. And it's a tough time to be in, particularly as we're coming off of the pandemic and we're dealing with so many other issues. Supply chain, staffing, the restaurant industry has been hard hit. And now is not the time to be dealing with so many other issues. What Modern Restaurant Management does is it's an industry publication based on restaurant operations. So we focus on lots of issues that other people don't. Some of our most popular articles have been about footwear and flooring and all kinds of things that are very niche that speak to the operational aspects of what we do. We've worked with the team at Fresh Avenue for a number of years. They've supplied us with some great content. And when we had this opportunity to produce a webinar, we really wanted to focus on helping restaurants in this time of crisis, and trying to help with solutions and find things that ways we can work together to provide value for the restaurateurs and provide a value proposition for restaurant guests. So I want to talk a little bit about what Fresh Avenue is, for those of you who don't know. So what Fresh Avenue does is kind of the connector for they build relationships with the fresh produce industry and the supply chain and warehousing, and then they bring them together, working nationally and regionally with a lot of the food service distributors. So it's these relationships that provide them with a lot of this expert level knowledge that we'll be able to share with you today on providing solutions and offering some examples of possibly things that might work for your restaurant. Move next one.
Next.
Great. So I wanted to introduce you to our participants who are our experts. First is Mark Vaughan, who's a managing partner at Fresh Avenue. He has more than 30 years experience with food innovation, product development, marketing, and processing in the fresh produce industry. Brian Rooney, who's operations and supply chain director and partner at Fresh Avenue. He also has decades of experience in purchasing operations in the fresh supply chain. At Fresh Avenue, he leads operations covering all purchasing and logistics. Perfect. Supply chain. We've all seen the pictures of boats out on the coast of California and not knowing what's on them, when we're going to get our stuff. And it is having, a big effect on the restaurant industry. So Brian, I know you have a great pulse on this. So what's the state of this? What have we been seeing? And what are you seeing now?
Thanks, Barb. I appreciate it. One important distinction there from the introductions I want to get out of the way first is I have decades, but not as many decades as the veteran in the room, Mark Vaughan, does. So just a little elbow there. Amber rolls her. She knew I was going to get a dig in early. But the overall supply chain right now is still challenging. It's very constrained from an operations standpoint, both with regard to truck capacity. We've seen some loosening this year. However, there is still not much slack in the supply chain with regard to the logistics side of things. What you saw last year was a tremendous amount of start-stop in production and operations, and that's a very challenging environment, especially when you're talking about an agricultural commodity. You can't tell the crops to quit growing because you don't have labor in the plant that day due to a COVID shutdown or something similar. Also, the demand cycle seems to be stabilizing a little bit this year, but last year we saw waves and somewhat of the bullwhip effect where you saw tremendous pull and then tremendous slowdown. And it would happen so suddenly, it was very hard to react for producers, suppliers, logistics providers, and all the way down to the restaurateur. I mean, you walk in one day, you have a full cooler of product to serve to your customers, the next day you don't. And you didn't know what your demand cycle was going to be. We're seeing a little bit more stabilization there. But that kind of environment created a tremendous disconnect between what I call fundamentals, which is what really drives supply and demand and pricing and costing, and what the reality was in the world. So fundamentals weren't necessarily driving it. It was more environmental factors, and the unpredictability that drives those environmental factors really wreaked havoc on the supply chain. Now we're seeing it come down to more fundamentals of inputs, when they can arrive, what the cost of those inputs is, and then how quickly you can scale up production to meet demand.
Mm-hmm. So where are we going? Do you anticipate things are going to be getting better, or is it going to be worse in the short term and better in the long term?
Mark and I talk a lot about this, and it changes daily. I'm a little bit more of the side, it's going to level off somewhat from a supply chain and predictability standpoint with regard to supply. But I think cost pressures are still looming. And I think a lot of those have to do with the fundamentals. We talk about fertilizer costs a lot. We talk about labor costs a lot. Freight seems to have moderated a little bit with regard to quarter-over-quarter increases and things like that, and shipping costs and container availability at ports and all of those types of fundamentals. But I still think with fuel costs being such a driver of that category, you have a lot of room for price pressure and some more inflation coming there. But I do see at least the supply chain and the availability of products improving somewhat as we get to more of a level playing field or stable state of demand, I guess you could say. Mark, you probably have some things you want to add there.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you've said. I believe that, and Barbara, thanks for hosting this, by the way. I think we have so many factors moving in the wrong direction. Brian mentioned some of them. Our producers are seeing costs. These would be the farmers and the packers and producers of fresh commodities. Costs moving in a very bad direction. You know, we all are well tuned on the diesel fuel and the fuel cost, but Brian touched on it. Fertilizer cost. Common fertilizers we use in ag are up between 50 and 100% over this time last year. And what that is, and this is kind of a nuanced view, but you know, you've got producers that are removing risk out of their portfolios. You don't have, you know, maybe you had a farmer there that was growing red cabbage, and he grew extra red cabbage, knowing, hey, I'll probably sell it. And if I don't sell it or have to sell it at a discount, it's not that big of a deal. Well, with costs being what they are, that red cabbage producer, he's not growing any extra. So that means if we're going back to that supplier and saying, hey, we need some extra red cabbage next week, he's not likely going to have that. There is not a lot of product out there that's not spoken for. Everyone's playing their cards close to the vest, because this risk, the cost has created an enhanced risk environment for these producers. And Brian also mentioned, you know, the labor. You as restaurant operators out there, you're seeing firsthand the labor situation. But those very factors are applicable to field labor, trucking, plant labor, packing house labor. And so that is, I don't believe we're at the end of that road. We're going to continue to see price pressure there. We also have overall inflation impacting all aspects of our world. And with new data coming out very recently, it is hitting home with the consumer. Price sensitivity is at play. So we've got cost pressures mounting and consumer price sensitivity coming into play.
Right. So you've mentioned a lot of these pain points for the suppliers, particularly the fertilizer cost. What were the factors that fueled that? And, are there alternatives that the suppliers can use?
And Brian, you may want to jump in, but the petroleum, the petroleum cost run-ups have impacted the fertilizer significantly. You have a good amount of fertilizer ingredients are sourced offshore, and that the supply chain issues have caused a ramp up in costs there. So those would be the two major factors on fertilizer costs. As far as options go, I mean, we are an industry that is moving toward more natural and more organic based soil amendments and inputs, but by and large, conventionally produced product in this country is generally uses conventional fertilizer. So options are there, but ready options to pull the trigger on at scale are not there.
Right.
Brian,
So,
you may have further on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the economics still don't quite pencil out to shift to a traditional natural fertilizer versus a petroleum based or an input such as that. So that creates challenges also. Supply is not there, and then the economics associated with it aren't there. You talk about cost inflation and then switching over to a completely natural fertilizer base, another big surge in input costs, which eventually gets passed on to the consumer. Geopolitical is also factoring in a little bit there as well with the conflict in Europe that's going on. Those countries export a lot of inputs to fertilizers, so that's a factor at play also.
So being we're on this subject, what are some ways that we can reduce the pressure on the suppliers moving forward?
So Mark and I mean, this is what we spend a lot of our day working on for our customer base in many ways. We deal mostly with distributors. We work directly with end user restaurants, as you mentioned during the introduction. And so we're always looking at ways that information can flow better up and down the supply chain, because ultimately that gives you more reaction time and that allows you to stave off some of these cost pressures, potentially hedge, potentially contract things. Build up supply, try to time production around when low cost inputs are available, things of that nature. Being that we deal with fresh products, that's always a challenge. You can't build a warehouse of something like the frozen guys can, or something when you hit a low cost point. But there are a few things that we'll talk about as we go through this call that I think could tremendously help. And we see restaurants doing some of them, and then we see restaurants, trying to look for, other ideas to add to that list all the time.
So let's talk a little bit about restaurants. We're in a season now where people are looking more for fresh produce, the salads, they want cold food. So, a lot of the restaurants are wondering, what can they do? And then they're wondering, where is their stuff? We were talking, why don't I have my tomatoes on Friday? And what do they need to know? What do restaurant owners need to know to kind of puzzle through all of this?
Mark, you want to open that one up? I've got a few bullet points around this segment, but feel free.
Yeah, I think I'm going to let you go ahead and hit the couple you have. I'm going to be talking about some menu ideas and menu dynamics here directly, but
okay.
Yeah.
Outstanding. And just so that we're not all gloom and doom, there is some silver lining to this, and in particular in the fresh space that we operate in. From March to April, this is just off the consumer price report that the government publishes. From March to April, fresh produce inputs actually were stable month to month. That is the first month that has happened in the past year. When you look at April 21 to April 22, that fresh produce component and cost of goods survey that they looked at increased 7.8%. So there is, some optimism that we're maybe seeing this stabilize here, at least for a minute. I do expect further increases, like we talked about with the fuel, completely unpredictable, and seems like it's going up every day at the pump. and also the fertilizer inputs, which are a little bit of a lagging input cost. We'll see those start to come in when we get to the fall season and start to transition growing regions and things. You'll start to see that new fertilizer input cost hit guys after they deplete inventories and pre-books. So there is still a little bit, but I think that dramatic price pressure seems to be decreasing a little bit, barring, acts of war, terrorism, uncertainty, geopolitical things that none of us can really predict. So
what do you think kind of accounted for that stability? And was it something that surprised you when you saw those numbers?
It was a little bit of a surprise, but then when you really start to step back and look at it, there are fewer inputs when it goes into growing produce. You have fertilizer, you have labor, you have water, you have equipment costs, which are heavily amortized. Those are long-term capital investments. And so when you're looking at every single one of 16 inputs for perhaps a prepared food or a dry good or even a canned good, and packaging is less of a percent of the total cost of goods in fresh produce, you didn't have as much upward pressure on the input cost section of fresh produce. So it makes a lot more sense. It also reacts much quicker because of the shortened shelf life and the shorter supply chain. So when you get increased cost inputs, you don't have 340 days of inventory like you might on a canned green bean. So, those costs can quickly stabilize. When you bake in a heavy cost increase on, aluminum for cans or tin or steel or pallets or anything else, and then those go in a warehouse and are shipped for the next 365 days, you're not going to see any price reduction on that because the cost is baked in the day that it's all produced and that warehouse is filled up. So I think just by the very nature of our industry, we're insulated a little bit there. And I think it's a boon that our industry as a whole, IFPA, I'm a member of that, the Fresh Produce Association that does a lot of work in DC and things like that. I'm on the Supply Chain Council. And one of the things we talk about is how this is something that's pretty good marketing for the fresh produce space. It's actually becoming cheaper and less volatile with regard to pricing to eat healthy. And that has not always been the case. It's always been cheaper to stick to the center aisles of the grocery store, not the perimeter. But now that equation seems to be changing a little in our favor. So,
oh, that's great.
I'd like to add as well that, a key service that Fresh Avenue provides that we're just getting so much interest and momentum around is our consolidation program. And Brian's team has done an exceptional job here. So we gather up product from a multitude of producers and get it in one place, inspect it, palletize it, wrap it, do everything that needs to happen to make it ready for shipment. And this saves, obviously, it has freshness implications because that customer comes in and has one pickup and they can get out back to their marketplace. But it also has cost savings. We can combine these shipments with other things we're doing and these pickup and activities with other activities we're doing and bring some scale to our customers and some efficiencies. And that reduces transportation cost and shipping costs for our customers.
That's a big time saver for the distribution network as well, and the buyer ultimately. They also get to spread the risk versus 2 deliveries of tomatoes a week in our Friday tomato example that we kind of keep talking about. You could get 4 deliveries a week, have every truck pick up a few tomatoes versus 1 truck loading a significant amount twice a week. And that gives you 4 or 5 inbound shipments of a product. And that's particularly helpful on quick turn items, and also ones with a high standard deviation of demand, ones that you see a surge and then a glut and then a surge and then a glut. So it's helped tremendously from an inventory management, warehouse spacing, freshness, cost of goods, all of the above. So there's some tremendous benefits to it. And Barb, you asked about some of the other things, that we're seeing our customers doing and some ideas that we have. One of the biggest pieces that Mark and myself and the sales team here at Fresh Avenue do is we're a conduit of information, and that goes both ways up and down the supply chain. And I think the more information that we can exchange between grower and ultimately restaurant owner, the better. And then the restaurant owner even translating some of that into consumer communication. And that helps drive perception. And it helps the grower react, and it also helps the restaurant know what's coming their way. And the best way to do that is not anecdotal, it's data. And so as an industry, I've seen a big move towards data harvest, data gathering. Companies are embracing the data. Companies are looking further out with forecasts and projections, trying to understand what the moves are going to be, because, you know, in this market, 1% is a big deal. And so I see that, and any information the restaurants can filter up to their supply base, very, very helpful. And I think the growers, you know, definitely need to do a better job making sure that information filters down, and not just the, hey, we're not going to have tomatoes Friday for your truck, but maybe the why, because customers are asking that when they go into the restaurant.
Mhm.
Right. So, you know, we're talking about data, and I'm a big data freak. And so what is the role of technology in all of this equation?
Huge, very, very important. And you're seeing that sector of the service industry around produce really evolving current state. We're seeing a tremendous amount of new companies and new entrants emerge, because it's been an underserved area. Produce is historically low margin. It's historically done off the back of a truck. And you know, so there wasn't a lot of sophistication there. So we've got some years of making up to do just to get kind of level. And then, you know, to get ahead in the technology game is kind of where the key players in the industry are moving. We're seeing that tremendously. And I see it's always been there on the restaurant side, that point of sale information and things that the restaurateurs have. Growers are now starting to look at that and say, how can we have this with regard to a field of lettuce or a field of romaine, or, you know, where the boats are, how many lemons are on those boats, things of that nature. And we've got to catch up with the restaurant companies, and, you know, both small and large, because they have that data at their fingertips in many cases. And it's lagging going up the supply chain, at least in the fresh space.
Right. So you talked a little bit about your consolidation program. So what are some other efforts that you do, that you offer, that you would kind of say are like, you know, insider secrets and things that you could, you know, offer to your clients?
We are constantly looking at the data that I talked about. We're looking ahead. We're doing crop projections. We've got a team in California and Arizona that go out and look at fields, even talk with seed companies to see how much seed is being ordered by season, by month, when plantings are going in. So we kind of get a macro look at what's going to be available and what growers are doing and where that behavior is. Mark's example earlier, where we talked about companies not speculating as much or planting that extra 10 or 15% of acreage that they used to do. They're not betting on that now. They're trying to get as tight to their numbers as they can. And so that information is always out there. That's one thing that we share a tremendous amount of with our customers. And if a customer has a specific question about a specific commodity, we go do a white paper on it. Amber helps support in that, and we'll go research a subject matter and really look at it in deep dive. You know, customer is looking at adding blueberries to their menu. We take a look at blueberry production, where geographically it makes the most sense to plug into their distribution network, what times a year those are best and readily available and have the lowest input cost historically. We go back to USDA surveys as far as crop estimates and crossings and Chilean exports, you know, during the winter months, all those things. And then hopefully we put together a solid risk management program for the restaurateur and help them make good decisions on what they're going to put on their menu for that next year.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to hit that again. You know, the drawing back of the producers not to have any extra product in the ground, that needs to be clearly understood by our restaurant operators in this country, to know that we need more guidance, we need more visibility, we need more view into what your needs are, so that we can have that product for you. We're all about continuity of supply. I mean, the best produce or best sourcing program in the world that doesn't have continuity of supply at its core isn't going to work. And there is less flex on the producer side. And that's a very important factor to remember right now. So, you know, and it takes 14, 16, 20 weeks to get a crop up, depending on what you're growing. So if you're an operator with 500 locations and you want to feature, I'll go back to red cabbage or tomatoes or whatever that may be, we've got to know about that probably more, in a better light than we ever had with more advanced notice, because the flex is simply not there.
All right. So let's talk about menu
Mhm.
and get into more of the menu dynamics. And I'd love to start with the idea of how you work with someone. What is it, what is that process? You talked just a little bit right now about it, but if I'm a new client and I come in and you're looking at my menu, how do you work with me and make sure that I have good choices that make economic sense, and choices that will be good for our guests?
You bet, Barb, thanks. So, and we, one of those services, I know you asked on the last slide, what are some things we offer? We work with a great many of our customers on menu development. And, the first place we start invariably is with those pantry items, the things they have already. And we just completed a project with a 900 unit chain. And that's the first thing we ask. What do you have in inventory at each restaurant right now? And so that's where we started. And simply enhancing something you have is a wonderful plan. It can generate some extra revenue, can generate some extra profitability, because small changes can create those dynamics for you. So that would be the first place we look, and that has some other cool factors involved. It can drive out more waste. Maybe it's an item you're not consuming at the restaurant level at the clip you would like to, and maybe enhancing it and broadening the use of that item allows you to go through that quicker. It improves your turns, your inventory, your freshness, and ultimately your buying power on that item. So Barbara, that would be an early spot we would look with most of our customers.
So can you give some examples of common pantry items that restaurants may be better utilizing after you take a look at what they're doing?
You bet. We see a lot of items, such as, carrots or avocados or tomatoes that they could use in a more robust fashion in the store. Carrots come to mind because carrots can be shredded for a salad, but they also can be cubed or sliced and roasted, or as part of a roasting dish that might combine cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and butternut squash and a whole variety of things. So, maybe it's taking a couple of pantry items that are already in play and augmenting that with a few new items, and that gets you where you need to go. Mm-hmm. And I was just looking, some data came out today, or a news release came out today from Blue Apron, and they said in a recent a company-sponsored survey of their customers, 89% of their participants stated they were interested in a seasonal or a special offering to help them celebrate a particular season or event. And consequently, Blue Apron is rolling out seasonally inspired side dishes and main dishes, such as buttery corn on the cob, creamy potato salad, and a romaine and Bibb salad with feta. So, that's a great example of Blue Apron being a competitor to most everyone on this call.
Right. So what can restaurants take away from that? What should they be doing to compete with that home cook environment to get guests to come into their restaurants?
Right. Well, outside of simply the traditional seasonality of the different seasons, whether it be fall or spring, but work with your produce supplier on what's the best available for that period. Don't ask that produce supplier today, what's the best today? That's not a bad question, but in menu planning, hey, what should I be thinking about in October or in January that can be sourced locally or regionally if possible, or if it's sourced a long way off, what's the best season for that? Because that drives obviously ultimately your customer experience. If we're talking best of the season, that customer is going to have a great experience with that product in all likelihood. You're going to be able to buy it cheaper as a restaurant operator, and your continuity of supply is going to be better. I worked with a customer a couple of years ago that decided to do a promotion on an item, really without any much input from the supply side, from us, and it didn't work. They chose absolutely the worst time of the year for that item to kick that off. And so there would be an example of what you don't want to do. So work with your produce suppliers on what might be the best choice. And I think that's a good path to happiness. Brian, I don't know if you have any further that you want to cover on that.
No, I think just one of the key points there that I want to drive home, produce is counterintuitive to the way it behaves. Typically, when it's the lowest price, there's the most available, and it's also the highest quality. That's what we see, and there's the most regions producing. So that Blue Apron corn example is great. They're going to run that during a peak time for corn production, both on the West Coast and the East Coast and the central United States. And you're going to see some of the best quality, and their input cost is going to be really probably at a low point if you measure the 52-week a year, USDA corn spot pricing. So those are the types of LTOs Mark's talking about, is really trying to peak it with a grower. And that goes back to that communication up and down the supply chain.
And essentially what you're talking about is building relationships, which is what you do. And, you're suggesting for the restaurants to, work with the people who are local to them so that they can discover and uncover these hidden gems, maybe, that they can then offer to their guests. One of the things that restaurants want right now, obviously, is to drive more traffic. They want to bring people in, to bring people back who may still have been hesitant until now to dine in. So what are some things that they can do to, kind of whet their appetite to bring them back in? We're talking about LTOs, limited time offers, and how successful ones can be very powerful, and particularly if they're based on unique items or items that are in season.
Thanks, Barb. We LTOs are not a new concept to anyone on this call, obviously, but I think it bears to hit for a few minutes that they really have wonderful benefits to the operator. Not, like any new introduction, not everyone is going to stick, but as Brian and I have talked about, working with your produce sourcing team can help you make these LTOs more productive and more successful. We know that LTOs, they drive traffic. It's something new to talk about. People want to try something different. And like I mentioned a moment ago, small differentiations can make a big impact on your margin. And I had one customer that added a red cabbage to a wrap and featured it, a sandwich wrap, featured it. And red cabbage is a very inexpensive input, but it's very colorful at the same time, and it added crunch. It really added a lot of dynamics to the product, and they were able to raise their margin, charge a little bit more for it, had very little cost input associated with it, and it became a permanent item for them. And I think that's what LTOs do best is they put new ideas and new products and new flavors out there for you to connect with your customer, right? I mean, we can look at the data and we can understand the global trends, consumption and all that, but sometimes that macro data pays off, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you need to get that product in your customer's mouth and get them to say what they think about it by their purchase. And LTOs provide that. And, you know, some examples of some LTOs that really the past year or so we've been involved with some of our customers. We had one customer introduce an organic spinach. This was a restaurant chain, a 400-unit restaurant chain. And we coordinated a video with the farmer that featured the farmer. So there was a big story behind this, and it was a very successful promotion for that customer. Another chain was seeking to add some enhanced roasting vegetables to their menu, and we brought a Murasaki sweet potato to the table, which is a purple skin, white flesh sweet potato. And it has been enormously successful for this 250-unit chain, and it has made it to the their permanent menu. I mentioned earlier about a roasting vegetable blend that has Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, carrots, butternut squash. This is where companies like Fresh Avenue, our broad expertise in sourcing, really pay off. This customer was struggling to get all these products gathered up and figured out and put together, and we were able to go out to the marketplace with our range of producers and get this done. And it was in a kit concept, so all these products came in one box, so that it simplified the back of the house operation tremendously for this restaurant group. And, you know, there's several other examples here. A shucked corn item. It turned out not to be a permanent item for this one customer, but not only did we find a bicolored shucked sweet corn, but we produced and developed a fixture for them to heat this corn in the microwave at their store level. So that's that's part of what a comprehensive produce supplier can do by way of LTOs, and it's and these LTOs often translate obviously into permanent placement of that product, and oftentimes an enhanced margin. You know, we're all in a business of decreasing margins, and so is my team has heard from me for those 3 decades that Brian mentioned that I've been around. New products are the lifeblood of any business, particularly one that has a commodity component to it, that people get tired of the same old offerings in many cases. So you've got to spruce things up a little bit with these LTOs. It's a great way to understand your customer.
You know, one thing that you mentioned, is a key issue for the restaurant industry right now, staffing. So how can what you do help with staffing? And, also does it kind of inspire the staff, because you're kind of mixing things up and adding that level of creativity to it? So does it help also engage with the staff as well?
Barbara, I believe it does. That's an excellent point, one that I probably haven't thought through as much as I should have. But yes, new items, if they don't add a lot of complexity to the operation, are generally met with quite a bit of approval from the team at the restaurant level. It's something new to talk to their regular customers about. It's something new for them to explore. And it's something for that team member or those team members to be proud of. So I think you bring up an excellent point.
So when you talk about LTOs, do you have a general recommendation to restaurants in regard to pricing so that it's cost effective for them to offer these items?
Yes. So we are entering a period of renewed price sensitivity, which I touched on early in the call. But I would say that magic spot is a 10 to 15, depending on your concept, say a 10 to 20% premium. I think you get over that and you're going to, in this environment anyway, you will begin to see a diminished activity around that item. So and that's a general statement. I mean, we have people on this call that are QSRs, quick serve restaurants, all the way up to fast casual and other set down dining. And so a 20% lift on an item that's $20 may not be palatable at all, but a 20% lift on a $5 or $6 item could be welcomed by that consumer.
We welcome any questions. If anybody has any questions, they can raise their hand or put it into the chat. I know I have a ton. First of all, we talked a lot about how produce is maybe a little bit more reasonable right now, and it kind of fits in with the plant-based trends that we've been seeing for the past few years. So how can restaurateurs kind of capitalize on that?
Brian, I may let you take that one. I do want to mention real quickly, while Brian's formulating some thoughts about that, controlled environment agriculture, indoor growing. You see a lot about that in the news, and it is a real deal, and it will have an impact on our marketplace. And right now it's a very costly way to do things, but as these inputs that we talked about, fertilizer, we spoke briefly about water and labor, these controlled environment operations tend to be more conservative of those resources. So that controlled environment agriculture gets its legs underneath us and hits their stride, I think you will see costs come down, and obviously transportation costs, because many of those operations are situated, closer to the customer. And, we do business with some of those folks now, and we've been impressed with their output. The costs are a little bit up there for most restaurant operators right now, and it's mainly a retail purview currently. But that's one thing that will have some price moderation, I think, impact on it as we move forward.
Agree there. That seems to be one of the biggest emerging trends. We're seeing all of food service really giving it a close look. Doesn't quite pencil yet, but the controlled environment growing, I think once that upfront capital expenditure is amortized over a decent number of production units, I think you'll see that unit cost start to come down and more in line with what a restaurant chain or a restaurant owner could stomach as far as an input cost goes. So, and I think it's going to be necessary too. I think as we see all the growing pressures increase in California and labor and water constraints and things of that nature, we're going to have to get smarter about the way we farm, and that conservative approach that they take to, preservation and sustainability and things like that is very necessary. So, and then with regard to getting into LTOs and really marketing those, Barb, and taking advantage of them, I think take a look at the data you have of what has been successful, what items you see moving among your customer base, what drives new traffic in your stores, and then work up the supply chain. Talk to your produce specialist, ask them if they even have a supplier that could get on a Zoom call or a conference call. In this day and age, we can all get directly connected to the guy that's farming your produce, which is pretty exciting, and have that joint call. And Fresh Avenue, we do those all the time. Mark's really good about getting a farmer on the phone with the guy who runs a restaurant. And we talk about, hey, you saw, a roasted vegetable did really well. What were items that were in it? Butternut squash, sweet potato. We want something a little more unique and fringe. Okay, all of a sudden we get to the murasaki, and then we've got a solution. And then we start talking with growers. When are they peak availability? When is the sizing right for what a restaurant would use in store? What's the distribution like? What region are they out of? How do we plug that in with some of the other produce that restaurant is buying already? The consolidation example that we talked about. And that way they've got a solution to bring that LTO all the way to market, get the product into their warehouse, not have to buy a whole bunch of it with the risk exposure that comes with that in case it's not successful and doesn't sell, which we see happen sometimes, obviously. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, as they say. But that helps from all sides. It also makes it very economical because you're not worried about as much inventory exposure. So those are kind of some of the successful inputs we see to having a productive LTO offering out there.
Right. So cauliflower is a product that has really kind of seen, its worth over the past 10 years. It's used in so many different things, cauliflower crust and pizza, and people have really embraced it. So are there other ingredients that people should be aware about that have that same kind of flexibility of use that restaurant owners can kind of go to as options for people who are interested in plant-based or people who are, just interested in trying new things?
We see a lot of interest in the legume space and peas, tremendous proteins there and starches. You're seeing those be put into pastas and other things like that, typically refined pea products, but you're seeing some people get into the fresh space there. I'm getting a low resource here as far as audio goes. You guys hearing me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. I think also any byproducts from the production of produce items, so leaves and greens around broccoli, around cauliflower, you're seeing that generate some interest as far as braising greens go and things like that. Corn is another one that's not quite as taboo as it used to be. Corn inputs, everybody remembers the high fructose corn syrup thing of purging that from menu offerings. You're seeing corn as an input come back around. And then the mushroom space seems to be pretty interesting. They have a quick cycle. They're pretty rapid scale up. And they've got some vitamin and nutrient benefits, and they're a great substitute for a meat item, and then there's a bunch of cool varieties of mushrooms coming on out there. It's not just the old button mushrooms and portobellos anymore. There's some new things that you're seeing out there that give kind of a savory element. So I'd say those categories are what I hear the most of in menu development. Mark's probably got dozens more because he's more plugged into that, but on the grower supply side, those are things I see quite a bit popping up.
Well, yeah, I mean, our team, Brian mentioned peas and beans. Our team was in Guatemala recently for an extended trip to the goal of which was to cultivate more pea and bean production. I mean, we believe that is an upcoming trend, whether it's pink-eyed, black-eyed peas or fava beans or runner beans. These are old world items, but their health benefits are there. They're easy on the land to grow. They ship well. I think that, and then of course, pea and pea derivatives. We have some trials on pea shoots in the ground, which are the tops of pea plants. They're very tasty. They taste like a green pea. And so, Fresh Avenue, we haven't talked much about it, but we're on the forefront of product development as far as growing. We have trials in the ground of new wacky ideas all the time, most of which, may not work, but that's why you have to try a lot of things. And we both in the desert area in Yuma and Imperial Valley, as well as the Salinas Valley in California, we've got trials in every cycle, trying to see what's next out there. And to offer our customers, early opportunities, early entry ramps to those opportunities. So
one question that restaurant owners always have is, what do my guests want? And guests over the years in this space in particular have become much more savvy. They're familiar with the produce. They want to know where things come from. They're very interested in sourcing. So in this space, what do you think it is that guests want and what they expect to see on a plate?
Well, I believe that with the supply chain issues, which have been unprecedented really here in the past 30 months or so, I think guests expect a continuity of quality and supply. They want to know their produce is fresh. And Barbara, to your point, I mean, the story behind the produce, its sustainability, the practices used has been important for a long time. And that importance is really ramping up. But you know, I believe the needs are basic still. They want good quality product that they know is fresh, that has you know, has been looked after from a food safety standpoint. You know, these are all things that our company helps with. You know, whether it's food safety audits, sourcing, the story behind it. I think I mentioned one of our LTOs where we coordinate a video feature with the farmer, the producer. Those are important aspects of what consumers expect. Now, I believe that that will just continue going, that they won't back up on that expectation.
And I think with the higher price points consumers are seeing at grocery stores, restaurants, everything else, I think they want to see something somewhat unique still and fresh with that kind of edginess to it. That's one of the things these home meal kit companies have really pushed into the forefront, is some of these new, you know, trendier produce items and you know, the kale craze and the cauliflower craze that you mentioned, things like that. I think consumers, hey, if I'm going to pay, you know, $4 or $5 more for that meal at a restaurant, show me something cool that I can't just make in my own kitchen.
Right.
You know, I think that's important.
Right. One of the things that you brushed on before was talking about, you know, kind of the risk analysis that the producers were doing, and they're not actually producing an overage of materials. You know, we're living in a time where we're very conscious of issues of sustainability and food waste. So how does that kind of factor into those issues?
Well, one of the big things on the producer side of things, when we're looking at the application for what that produce is going to end up in, that's really critical, because you can use not what I would call a byproduct, but maybe something that's a number 2 grade that's not going to make it at a grocery store shelf, because everybody has this expectation of perfection when they go into a grocery store. But when you're going to dice it up back of house and put it on a roasting pan and then serve it, you know, that all looks the same. And it may just be misshapen. It may be larger than what grade is, you know, off color, you know, all of those types of things. But when cooked and when prepared, there's savings there for the grower, because it's a realized sale that they may not have realized before. And there's also a savings for the restaurateur, because those are typically had at a reduced price, you know, versus number 1 and all of that. Tomato guys had that figured out a really long time ago, and now we're seeing that creep into other produce items as well.
And that is a service that we very typically provide to our, you know, it's finding the right product, and sometimes the right product for the application. And as Brian says, a misshapen sweet potato works just fine if you're going to cube it up in a store. So and it can save the farmer from throwing that product away if he's very retail-oriented supplier, and it can provide that restaurant operator with a very usable product at oftentimes a discounted price. So,
and kind of a subset of that, Barb, something else that enters into that is more usable product in the box, shipping on a truck across the country or on a boat from another country into port. And so looking at ways that it can be heavier trimmed at field without, you know, impacting quality or shelf life, so that every leaf on that head of lettuce or romaine or whatever it is usable. Some semi-processed items. We deal a lot with value add producers where something's chopped and then you're getting in 100% usable product. So if that container shipping from Arizona or California or Guatemala or anywhere has 22 unit servings of that product, that's what you're going to get when you open the box. Sometimes with commodity things and things that you chop up in the back of house, it's all dependent on the kitchen labor and how they use the knife that day to dice it up. So predictability and actually usability of the produce is another big thing, because freight has become such a big factor as input costs go.
Right. So what would you say is your best advice at the moment for restaurants to provide cost-effective menu items that will tantalize their guests, and, and make them make money.
Well, I would say it's back to create some small differentiations, roll out some LTOs, not a lot of risky moves on your part. I think that talk to your produce supplier and ask them, hey, what do you have in your warehouse that I might be able to enhance my offerings with? First, look at your own pantry, then look at your supplier's warehouse, and run some tests, run some trials, work with suppliers on product development. We see what's working through a broad range of customers. From our chair here at Fresh Avenue, I think we can provide some very good guidance along those lines, depending on your operation. So that's I think that would be the essence of what I'd have to say.
Brian, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think, really work hard on contingency plans around it as well. Talk to your supplier about that, and develop a substitute or an alternate item in case there is some kind of massive crop failure or hailstorm, or, who knows what else could happen that could impact your supply. Nobody wants to spend all the money on development, marketing, advertising, and then it comes in, you don't have that product to put on people's plate when they come in the store to order it. So, work on something that's closely related to it, have that contingency plan in place, have the training in place to be able to prep something, maybe if you can't get the semi-prepped item that I mentioned earlier, but at least that's in that same category. I think that's really critical with today's supply chain environment is, you still have to be innovative. You still have to drive customer foot traffic to your restaurant and your store. But at the same time, put a little extra into the contingency planning as well, just from a supply chain standpoint, because we're in a very strange environment where it's just not always there on the shelf when you want to go get to it. And that's something most of us haven't really lived through before. We've heard our parents and grandparents and things talk about it, but none of us have seen that. So it's a new environment. So that risk mitigation is always a critical input.
So where do you think we'll be, say, a year from now, if we have this conversation again? Do you hope we'll be in a more hopeful place and moving forward and more away from the pandemic, and that the restaurants will return to a more fruitful place?
Yeah, I believe a year from now we will be in a better place. I mean, this is the strongest economy in the world here in the United States. And, we do have a broad range of options and supplies out there. I do think we're in for some choppy water from a cost standpoint. We're not done with inflation, certainly on the input side from all those factors we mentioned, but it will smooth out, things will settle down, and we have, as the pandemic has taught us, we have a resilient economy and a resilient people here that I believe there'll be a stronger day coming. But hopefully some of what we talked about provided some food for thought to our participants today, and how they might gain a little interest, increase excitement from their customers, mitigate some costs. So,
perfect. Ryan, do you have anything?
I echo Mark's sentiment there. I think we've got 12 to 14 months of very choppy waters here. We're going to see some shakeout happen. We're going to see a few categories get worse before they get better, and I think we'll see some continued cost escalations. I think we'll still see some supply chain challenges throughout these next 12 months. But I do think some overarching trends are here to stay. Sustainability, definitely, reduction of waste. But I think also I'm still somewhat bullish on food service too. The general consumer out there does not cook as much in their kitchen. No matter how easy these home meal companies can make it, you don't always have the time to do that. You don't always want. That's more of an event now for folks. Is, hey, let's cook dinner in our kitchen and have people over or whatever else. Anymore in this environment, you're always on the go. You've got things going on, and I think so going to restaurants is still going to be a big deal for people. I think it's just going to look different, and I think capturing people's attention continues to become very challenging because you guys are in a very competitive environment and it's tough, and there's new restaurants on every corner all the time, and so keeping your edge is a challenge. We sympathize with it tremendously, and we're here to help, and hopefully some of what we talked about today does provide some insight what's going on this grower side, so you can react and run your business based on the environment you're in.
Perfect. I think that's a great note to end on. Very hopeful. I know I'm very hopeful that the restaurants will be recovering and finding new avenues for places and things to do. And so thank you both very much. And I hope everybody who is interested can reach out to Fresh Avenue for more information to learn how their programs can help you and help your business.
I would like to thank Amber Perro, our Director of Marketing here at Fresh Avenue. She's an essential part of our team here, and she helped coordinate all of this. And then Barb, I want to thank you and your great team there at MRM. I read every article that's sent out, and I find it very informative. And thank you for the good work you do there at MRM.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Echo Amber.
Yes, great job, Amber and Barb, both on this. You made Mark and I think look at least somewhat comprehensible, so which is in of itself. How should people reach out to us? We probably don't have a slide with contact information or anything, but obviously you can get in touch with us through the website. I think hello@freshavenue.com is a good email address to hit. That goes to Mark and I and some of the key members on our team. So we'll definitely make sure that we correspond with you and get back to you if you have some questions you were too shy to ask today, or if you have any referrals to other folks who may not have been able to be on the call, feel free to share this with them as well.
Great. Perfect.
All right. Thank you, everyone.